This is the Morning Tempo Podcast. I am your host, Rabanzo. On this podcast, I have conversations with business owners and the entrepreneurial with the slant toward creativity. It's an opportunity for you to learn with me from people who are finding success in the business world, all intended to make your entrepreneurial journey a little bit easier. Welcome to another episode. This is going to be episode 48 of Morning Tempo. I'm finally approaching 50. It's been a while. Things slowed down since I first started, but I'm still having fun with it. My guest for this episode is Ovidilio David Vasquez, who also goes by Ovi. I recorded this conversation with him on the 22nd of January this year, 2022, while I was still based in Vista Mar, Panama. But I'm recording this intro just a day before the episode is released into the wild from my new studio in Querétaro, Mexico, enjoying a cup of coffee here with you. Hope you're enjoying your coffee or enjoyed some coffee or tea or whatever your guilty pleasure is in the mornings or midday. Ovi was raised on a sugarcane farm in Guatemala, and his life path took him from Guatemala to the U.S. and to graduating from Harvard Business School online, but it didn't end there. Today, he is a sought-after speaker who educates young students by sharing his story and insights on how they can succeed in school. To sum up his life story in Ovi's words, paraphrasing here, he learned to wield a machete in the sugarcane fields at the age of 8, and at 15 he moved to the U.S. That was in 2006, unaccompanied at the time. And then his life changed forever. Around 2009, he found himself alone and with zero support in the U.S., doing what needed to be done to survive. He put himself through high school, working various jobs until a mentor inspired him to go to college. That was a defining moment in his life, as well as being accepted into Harvard Business School online, where he earned certifications in technology and project management. Ovi is the author of 6 books, a TEDx speaker on self-leadership, and has been an on-air collaborator for the Spanish station Univision. He has worked for a number of well-known companies such as Apple, Tesla, Salesforce, Uber, and GM. I noticed that throughout his story as we talked, there was a recurring theme of mentorship, and I'm guessing that his mentors weren't sure if they were going to have an impact on his life, but they did. He definitely paid attention to what they said. Ovi has also been a voracious consumer of motivational material and has held several sales gigs. And he sees these two things as a big part of his personal development and in shaping the way he thinks. We talk about this and some of these surrounding details, including selling wax at a gas station, being one of the best communication schools he ever went to, tips for learning a second language, Googling his way into Harvard Business School, learning in his sleep, sales and appearances, and the most attractive curve on a person's body, the smile. All right, I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did recording it. Here is me speaking with Ovidilio Vasquez. Tell me about moving to the U.S. I gathered that your mother kind of left you in the States at a young age to care for your grandmother and that you guys are from Guatemala, but where were you and what was all that like?
I lived in Hayward, California for about 13 years. I just moved to Santa Rosa, California in the last few months. That's where I went to high school. Went to high school in Hayward, California, learned English there. I worked in many other cities around the area, but mostly the entire time in Hayward.
Do I understand right? You were kind of left, maybe not completely alone, but you were a little bit alone, at least without a lot of the normal support that a high school kid would have when she took off. And I'm sure the circumstances were difficult, but how did you fare your way through high school and on to further education?
Yes, definitely. So situation happened. My grandma became very ill in Guatemala. And so my mom decided, hey, I need to go take care of my mom. That's what she said, which was my grandma. And so she said, do you want to go with me? And I said, it was so hard for me to get to the United States through the border and the desert and things like that, that I don't think I will be able to take the trip back to the U.S. if I go with you. So I say, why don't you go ahead and I will stay here. And I was already working on a warehouse from 7 p.m. to 2 a.m. from Sunday through Thursdays. So I was already able to pay my rent and pay all my bills because my mom always took all my money and just give me $50 back out of my paycheck, and she would tell me, oh, these are for the bills, these are for the washing, and this is for the food and everything else. I was already kind of used to that, and uh, she moved in 2009 back to Guatemala. Sadly, 2 months later, my grandma passed away, which was one of my probably lowest moments during high school, and I decided to drop out of school. Luckily enough, my counselor convinced me to stay just by asking me what would my now dead grandma would say. She would say, like, what would your grandma, your grandma just passed, what would she say if you went to tell her that you wanted to quit school? And I imagine my grandma and me walking up to her and letting her know, Mama Lena, I want to quit school because the school is hard for me. I don't understand the English. I don't understand the classes. I don't understand how it all works. I didn't understand the credit system. A lot of, even though I am Latino, like most other Latinos, I am Central American. And so oftentimes Mexican students can discriminate towards Central Americans. So I experienced that during high school. And so I said, I don't even have a lot of friends here. So I don't want to come back anymore. And so she said, what will your grandma say? And I imagine saying all those things to my grandma, and my grandma looking at me straight in the eyes and saying, mijo, you stupid, because why would you want to quit, right? And then I imagine her saying, you have my blood, you carry my pride and things like that. My grandma would have said, you carry my last name, even if I don't carry exactly her last name anymore. But I imagine my grandma saying that and just making it to the point where she would have not wanted me to quit. And so on that very day, because I was broken down in tears and I couldn't think straight, I still went home thinking I'm not going to come back to school after speaking with the counselor. But on that night, I made a decision that, hey, you know what? She could have not seen me graduate because she lived in Guatemala. But now that she is in heaven, she can see me graduate if I graduate. And I made the decision in 2009 to stay in school. Now, when I made this decision, I was in high school probably for about 8 months only. And so graduation was kind of like 2 years away. And so I made the decision that day to continue my commitment, to continue working in school for 2 more years so I could graduate. And then 2 years later, I was crossing that stage, just imagining my grandma, watching me from heaven. And that kind of helped me as a young person. Even though I didn't live with anyone, I lived by myself, renting a garage the whole time.
Do you ever talk about that one question that the counselor asked as being one of the most important in your lives?
I haven't addressed it that way, that it was one of the most important in my life, but I definitely do share the question to make it a point for the students that, hey, you may not want to graduate for yourself, or you may want to graduate for someone that may not even live with you, right? They may be in your home country. They may even have already passed, but do it for them. So oftentimes we do more things for more people than we do for ourselves. And so that's when I share that question. What would your grandma say? And so my grandma would have said, at the end of me explaining why I want to quit, she would have said, don't be stupid, or you stupid. Why do you want to make that decision?
Great. You gotta love parents and parents of parents. That was great.
You know it. Yeah.
And what happened? Okay, so you graduated. What happened immediately after high school? How did your journey continue?
Immediately after high school, nobody really asked, do you want to go to college? You should go to college. Nobody mentioned it. And so what happened was, during the day, I thought, well, I don't have any more school, so I'm just going to keep on working. And so instead of working from 7 p.m. to 2 a.m., I switched to working daytimes in this warehouse. I continued working in that warehouse, offloading truck after truck after truck after truck. On average, I would offload 8 trucks full of 8 trucks, meaning 8 containers of trucks, 53 footers, average about 800 to 1,600 boxes. Sometimes the boxes were from Guitar Center. Sometimes the boxes were from Aeropostale, clothing and stuff like that. So I just kept on working. And eventually I quit the job because my car was an old bucket. It broke down. I left it in some warehouse garage. They were going to tow it. They called me and they say, come take out your car because we're going to tow it. So I talked to my supervisor. I was at work and I said, hey, this is what happened. Could you please let me go early? And he said, yeah, no worry. Go ahead. No, go ahead and get your car and just come back if you can today. If not, just come back tomorrow. As I'm walking out of the warehouse, a brand new general manager, saw me walking out. His name was John. And he said, hey, David, where are you going? Because everyone called me David at work. And so I explained what happened. I said, I already asked my supervisor to let me go. And he said, it's okay. So that's why I'm walking out. And he said, no, go back to your truck. And when you finish your job, then you can go. And oh my goodness, Robert, I mean, I got so pissed off. And I just turned around and walked out, right? Because I explained to him, if they tow my car, I won't have money to take it out of the towing parking lot, right? So he said, and as I'm walking out the door, he said, David, if you walk out of that door, don't you come back. Well, I never went back. That was the last time in 2012 that I ever worked in that warehouse. So they called me 4 or 5 days later and said, David, where are you? We're waiting for you. I said, John said not to come back. They said, no, he was just pissed off. He wants you to come back, actually. I said, no, I'm not coming back. But David, who's gonna do your job? Well, hire somebody else. I'm not coming back. Never went back.
Good for you.
And so from that job, it was a blessing to have quit, because then I was desperately looking for another job. My car was broken down. I had nobody to fix it. And so I literally, Robert, I walked from Hayward because I didn't know how to use the buses. I never used the buses before. I always had my old bucket, right? Which took me everywhere to school, stuff like that. Yeah. So I would walk from Hayward to Union City, which was at least a good hour walk. In car, it'll take you like 15 minutes maybe. Mm-hmm. And just looking for a job, going from warehouse to warehouse, walking and just asking, hey, are you guys hiring right now? Filling out applications. Long story short, I got a job at selling wax for cars at gas stations. This was a commission-only sales job. And good Lord, this was my best communications school that I could ever had, because I had to talk to people who, I just didn't matter what they look like in terms of their clothing, in terms of their appearance, in terms of their skin color. I was only focused on, if it moves, I have to talk to it because I can have a chance to make a sale.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's possibly one of the best educations you had, I would imagine.
Indeed. I mean, Tony Robbins says, I believe he says that a 3-year sales job, door-to-door sales job, even though it was not door-to-door, it would equate to 2 years of community college in communications. And so to me, here I was with an accent trying to persuade anyone and everyone to buy this wax, which they did not go to the gas station for. They usually go to the gas station just to get their gas. And here I was spraying wax on their car, and they would be very pissed off sometimes. Like, don't touch my freaking car, And I said, well, if I don't show you, you can't see how great this product is. Yeah, but I didn't ask you for it, right? And of course, sometimes I just had to push the envelope. And sometimes when they would see how shiny the part where I sprayed was, they would be like, oh, holy cow, they would say their expression. It actually is cool, man. It's nice. How much is it? And that's how I would make my sales. Because commission only. If you don't sell, you don't eat.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
When does Harvard Business School Online come into the picture?
Harvard Business School Online, a great blessing for me. 2009, I was working as a data management specialist for a smart homes startup in Union City, actually. What a great job that I had there. And I had a conversation with my manager. He was probably over 50 years old, from Brazil. What a great guy. I respect him so much to this day. And in the conversation casually that we were having, he said, you know what, Ovi, one thing I can tell you is I regret in my life is that I didn't go to college. And I said, you have regrets in your lives? He said, yes. And that's one of the main ones. Well, that just motivated me to do something about furthering my education, right? Because there I was now, I was 18. I was, I cannot even do my math. So it was in 2019. So I was 28. I was 28. Yes, I was 28 years old. Yeah. And so I said, I better get an education. And so I began looking online for degrees for adults. Long story short, I end up on the Harvard Business School I'm sorry, that actually I ended up on another university, but I met someone who was helping young people get into Harvard Business School and other elite universities. I called him and I said, Mr. Mars, I said, could you please help me get into Harvard? He says, man, you're way too late. I help high schoolers. You are out of high school for a long time, right? And I said, there's got to be a way for me to get in. And so he says, no, there's no way for you to get in. And at least he was talking about getting a bachelor's, right? Going for an undergraduate. And so I just Googled my way into some way, somehow getting into Harvard. And I find Harvard Business School had just recently released the Harvard Business School online platform. And even Mr. Mars was not aware of it because I told him later, and he's like, oh, I didn't know that existed, right? And I was so shocked that he did not know that existed. When I saw the program that you could apply for it and that it would last a few weeks and you could earn a certification and go into more advanced certifications, I simply fill out the application. You know, I explained that at this point I worked for Apple, Tesla, Salesforce, Uber. I explained a little bit of my background, farm boy from the sugarcane fields of Guatemala, and you know how I learned English so quick. I learned English in a year and a half. I was speaking already with everyone and anyone, and so I just wanted to make it a point in my letter. For me, it was a sales letter.
Sure.
I wanted the person to see, here's a person with great potential who identifies opportunities, who learns quickly, who stays committed when he sticks to his goal, when he makes up his mind that he wants to achieve something. I would be crazy not to allow him into this program. And that's how come a few weeks later, I received the acceptance letter into a entrepreneurship certification program that they had. They still have to this day available for adults to join. And so then, you know, I applied just a few months ago. I applied to a more advanced leadership program as a specialization in leadership and management, in which you have to earn other certifications to earn that one. And again, you know, I was also accepted into it. But that's how the Harvard Business School Online came into my life.
Thank God for that car wax sales gig.
Good Jesus, yes.
Taught you the sales skills you needed for that letter. That's great.
And I must say also multi-level marketing. I was recruited to Amway in 2012 when I was just fresh out of high school. I was in Amway for a year and a half. And the main thing I learned there is that you must be an entrepreneur and be willing to be comfortable being uncomfortable. I quit the MLM industry, but those lessons stay with me to this day.
Sure. Yeah. On learning English in a year and a half.
Yeah.
I heard you, I think, talking to Lee Lin on the Funny Millionaires podcast about this. And what are your favorite tips to give to people when it comes to learning a second or third language?
My favorite tips, they seem a little bit out of the box for a lot of people. But I think they work for me, and I'm pretty sure it could work for many other people. So I hope those that are listening at least will give it a try. This is the out of the box. This is out of the box thinking right here, or idea. I purchased a program by the Earl Nightingale Conant Corporation, which is one of the leading producers of self-development content, right? For years, for decades. And so the program, it was called High Achievers. And the program was meant for you to listen to it while you were asleep. And during my high school, I would listen to that program while I was asleep because I read research that said that our brain is more active when you're asleep than when you're awake. And so I would listen to those things. And then the other thing that I did, which I recommend somebody who wants to learn English quickly would do, is to listen. I would listen to very long recordings of Bob Proctor. He was featured on a movie-like series. It was called The Secret. And so he was talking about the power of the mind, the subconscious mind, and how it all works, how we can attract things in our lives and things like that. And so for a lot of people, that's kind of like a woo-woo kind of thing. I don't believe in law of attraction, of like think positive and it will come to you. Well, I happen to have a strong belief about that. And so I just listened to those during the night. You know, I was asleep and just let it play. It is my strong belief that those things made some new neural connections in my brain for my brain to begin to learn and adapt to the language that it was listening to, which I didn't even understand at the time. fully. And so, besides that, the other tip is definitely the circle of friends, right? My friends weren't necessarily Latinos. Most of them would always speak Spanish. So my friends were Indians, my friends were from Afghanistan, my friends were Chinese, and I had a lot of other friends that were non-Latinos. Mainly the only Latino people that I had around me were, the girlfriends that I would have, because that's usually I was always attracted to Latinas rather than anyone else during high school. Yeah.
That's great. I had heard you say also that you were inclined to put yourself in situations where you had to speak English as often as possible. Is that accurate?
100% accurate. When I was recruited into the MLM industry with Amway, there's a large group of Hispanics, and I put myself into the group of the Indian people from India, right? And I was surrounded by doctors, lawyers, engineers, people that were doing multi-level marketing, and they had their own professions, their own businesses. They would always speak to me in Spanish, and so I just had to force myself to try my very best to understand what they were saying, because oftentimes they had a very thick accent. Those that weren't born in the United States, those that were born in the U.S., they just had a way of thinking that I began to think, I have to be like these people. They are engineers, they are doctors, they are lawyers, I wasn't really hanging out with them because I wanted to be a diamond, or they had different levels to the MLM. Mm-hmm. I was hanging out with them because my main mentor in the MLM industry was a scientist who worked for a Genentech in San Francisco, and I would go to his home and I would see his home. So those kind of environments, I would go to many outside of the MLM trainings. I would go to other trainings which I would pay for myself, and they were English, trainings delivered in English. So as much as I possibly could, the music that I would listen to, I remember clearly listening to Red Hot Chili Peppers all the time, and I didn't understand half of whatever they were singing, but I was just forcing myself into it. And, here we are, just speaking all over the nation now, virtually, in person, publishing books, getting the message across to say, hey, there is always a way if you really put your mind into it, if you persevere through the tough moments of life, because there's always tough moments in life. Even now that I'm 30 years old, I'm not as young as I used to be. I have families. There's always personal problems, financial problems, business problems, entrepreneurial problems, sales problems with your teams. And so if the young people can see that if they focus on themselves, the problems outside will get resolved. If you resolve your inner challenges, the inner issues that are going on.
Yeah, that's a good tip.
Yeah.
You might get a laugh out of this. I have learned Spanish over the past few years that I've been here in Panama. I spoke very little before we moved from the States here. And my father was a Mexican-born national, but I was kind of a late baby. So in just to put in perspective, his generation, he didn't really want his kids to speak Spanish because he wanted them to fit in at school. And that, I think, just sort of carried over. And then I used to just sort of put it off on my parents. But the more I've heard myself talk about this, I realize I just put it off in my life, thinking it wasn't important. So anyway, these are good stories for me to hear, like, listening to music. Ooh, it's so hard to understand singers in Spanish, for instance. and also, like, I do web design work, and to try and get immersed in Spanish speaking, like WordPress designers, for instance. It's difficult, but those are good things to expose ourselves to. So I appreciate
100%.
that. I read that you tested driverless vehicles for a while too. What was that like, and was that in San Francisco?
Just over 2 years. Yeah, I was in San Francisco. And how did I get started in that? I worked for Tesla on robots that build the batteries, which they call modules. And then I worked for Apple refurbishing iMacs. And so that was my tech experience. Suddenly I get a call from Uber, a recruiter, and she said, "Hey, are you Ovidilio Vasquez?" I said, "Yes." And I'm calling you from Uber, and I'm wondering if you would like to join our team. Well, I was thinking she wanted me to drive cars and give people rides, right? And I had an old bucket. And so I didn't even think my car would qualify. And this was me right after graduating a program in San Francisco that I went to learn project management and technology. Mm-hmm. Long story short, she said, "No, we don't want you to drive cars. We want you to work in our autonomous vehicle department." And I said, "Well, tell me some more." And then she told me some more, and I said, I don't have experience in that. I just don't want to waste your time, or mine, of course. And she said, well, you have experience on robots and you have experience in computer, and this is nothing more than a robot, a computerized robot. So she said, would you like to go through the interview process? And then 2 weeks later, I was working at Uber, just traveling from one state to another state, learning how to test the vehicles and how to work with the engineering team. And so that was my starting. And then I transferred to working for General Motors, which bought a company called Cruise for over $1 billion. And I just worked in that industry for almost a year and 3 months, or about 2 years and 3 months. It was a great experience. I trust the vehicle, I trust the technology, but then because I have family, it didn't work for me to keep a job per se. I wanted to be mostly at home with my babies.
Nice. What part of that move, like on the surface, that sounds like it was an okay move, but clearly it was something positive in your life? Because you said you were at Tesla right before when you went to the interview, right? You were still at Tesla?
No, when I went to the interview, I had just graduated a tech program in San Francisco on project management. The program is called Year Up. Okay. And so because of that program, I had also just completed, you do both at the same time. I completed an internship at Salesforce, right? I had an office in the 27th floor building. And so maybe a week or so later after graduating, that's when I received the call. But I worked in Tesla in 2015. And when I worked in Uber, it was 2017. It was 2 years later. So it was a great move. Let me share this with you, Roberto. I would probably get 2 or 3 invites to interview to work for other self-driving vehicle companies in the Bay Area every single month, like 2 to 3 invites. You want to work with Waymo, which was, is a Google company. You want to work with Zoox, which is its own company. You want to work with Apple. You want to work with Aurora. There's at least 14 of them, and they would always invite me to, hey, do you want to interview with us? And it just didn't work for me. I already like working in San Francisco instead of going to Palo Alto or Santa Clara or Mountain View and things like that.
Sure. Yeah, cool. It was perfect timing then.
It was perfect timing. Yeah. And I still get some invite. I just got an invite maybe 4 months ago to work in Tracy. Now they are working on autonomous vehicles in Tracy as well.
Very nice. So I think I picked this up on this question up from your podcast interview with Lee Lin, and we'll wrap up. We can wrap up with this, but can you share your thoughts on sales and being good looking?
And being good looking. So the thing is, the people say don't judge people by the cover, or don't judge the book by the cover, but everyone judges you anyways, no matter how you look, right? And then of course, someone may consider you good looking or not good looking, depending on how they think of you and what their perception is of the world. So I really think that making sales, and if you look your very best, then you would look good to a lot of people. And that is the very first moment, the very first chance that you have for anyone to take down the wall that they have already out. Everyone has already a wall put up, a defense wall between them and another person, right? And it does not have to be an interaction that has to do with sales. And so the very first thing to build a rapport with anyone is just by your presence alone. And I believe this was a quote by Abraham Lincoln. I read it somewhere, that if you are over 30 years old and and your face is all messed up, this is your responsibility to fix it. So I think it has a lot to do with how you present yourself, even when it's not about sales. And aside from that, the charisma. If you don't have charisma, you must learn to develop it, because based on Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People, you can be a great listener, you can make things about the other person and all those things, but the other thing is the energy it transmits. And so charisma, it can carry over, transmit to the other person, say, I kind of like this guy, even though you haven't even said a word. It's just it is, you can't see these happening, but it happens. If you have heard this quote that says, or phrase that says, some people light up a room when they walk in, and some people light up the room when they walk out, right? So in sales, that's very important, right? That's very important. So being good looking, the sexiest curve in anybody's body is their smile, right? As simple as giving the right smile at the right moment to the right person. Sometimes if you overdo it, they think you're a creep or something like that, even if you're approaching because you want to sell something. It's very important to learn how to gradually and at the exact moment use every single factor for you to sell the other person on what you want them to to buy, so that you can give them value, and then in return the reciprocity will happen, that they will give you value back, which tends to be sometimes a financial transaction. Will give you money for what you're selling, whether a product or a service. So that's my point.
I like that.
Mm-hmm.
Ovi, thank you so much for joining me for this conversation today. And tell me, I know I have it written down here on my long page of notes, but because it's such a long page, I can't find it, but it's ovinspires.com, correct?
Indeed, ovinspires.com. We just, we're right now working on a national tour for students, and that's what we're working on right now.
Cool. And it's ovinspires.com for those of you who want to learn more about Ovi. And I suppose one last little closing question. You said you moved to Santa Rosa, which I gathered was somewhat recent. How are you liking it there?
Santa Rosa is great. They call it the wine country, even though I don't drink wine myself. But my wife wanted to move here for a long time. She grew up here. And so the environment's great. People are great. If you want to go to the rural area is just like a 5-minute driving distance, 5-10 minutes at most. If you want to be in the city, you are in the city. There's everything I need here. Whenever I need to travel, there's an airport here. The only thing I don't like is there's only one bridge to go to the Bay Area, to the East Bay Area. Mm-hmm. So, but other than that, I think it's great. The environment's great. People are great. Everything here is great. There's nothing I dislike about this place.
Well, how lovely for you and your wife to return to her place where she grew up, and your kids too. Ovi, it was a real pleasure. Thanks again, man, for joining me today.
Likewise. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and I really hope everyone that's listening continues to follow you, and I appreciate everything you're doing for everyone here.
Oh, thank you, man.
Thank you, Robert.
That was fun. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Ovi and me. If you'd like to keep up with my weird world and some of the insightful and useful things I'm learning from guests or otherwise discovering on my own, head over to morningtempo.com to sign up for my monthly newsletter. Yes, news, N-U-S-E. It's a great way to support the podcast. It's free and you can unsubscribe at any time. This podcast exists in part through, no, not in part, entirely through the generosity of its listeners. If you found value in this episode, please follow us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. It really helps others discover it. And to learn about the variety of ways you can support the podcast, please visit morningtempo.com/crowd sponsor. Thanks again for listening. That is a wrap. I am peacing out. Enjoy your day. Be kind to others. Stay creative and stay curious.